think that Trae Young was one of the more heavily scrutinized players this season. The Hawks made a lot of moves this offseason. A lot of people expected the Hawks to take the next step. And, you're a few weeks away from the All-Star break, I would think, and the Hawks had a losing record, and Lloyd Pierce wasn't up to par, and Cam Reddish hadn't ascended in his second year and lived up to the potential he showed at the end of his rookie season. DeAndre Hunter was playing great basketball, and then, he started battling injury stuff. Bogdan Bogdanovic was getting injured, all of that, and the Hawks weren't living up to everything. Then you insert Nate McMillan, and the Hawks magically became one of the best teams in basketball. They went on this magical playoff run. Trae Young, in my opinion, proved he's a superstar. But not to answer the question, because I think that that's where you're going to go too. Blake, what else do you think Trae Young proved in this first playoff run, other than I think most people would say now that he's a superstar?
Yeah, so first things first, the fact that he didn't make the All-Star game, just like looking in hindsight, is kind of like wild. This team didn't have anyone make the All-Star team. He didn't even make the All-NBA team. And there's guys that when I compare Trae Young to on the All-NBA team at guard, I'd say he's just as good. You could even argue potentially better. And that's wild to me. He didn't make that. Ben Simmons was chosen as an All-Star over him. Now, Ben Simmons had a great regular season, but I mean, Trae Young was the number one player on a 5 seed, so that's got to count for something. So first off, just how disrespected they were by NBA standards and him specifically. And I know a lot of it's probably just due to his defense, and his defense is not good in any way, shape, or form. Don't need to beat around the bush. It's something that he's heavily criticized for. But going off of that, in the playoffs, I saw this was from a LeBron website, so take this what you will, but him and LeBron are the only 2 players to average 29 and 8 in a postseason run with a minimum threshold of 15 games. I mean, just putting them 2 on that list is pretty crazy to me. But yeah, I think overall that just shows how great of a playmaker he is, and I'd argue he's probably a top 5 playmaker and just guy that his combination of scoring and passing and assisting is top 5, and that's what I define it as. And there's definitely guys that are better than him. I'd say Luka, I would say Harden, and a few others are better, but he's right up there. And it's crazy because when you look at the body frames, his is by far the smallest. And that's one thing that's so impressive about him. But my last thought with him is things that I still want to see more of. I hate his shot selection from time. Like, his 3-point shot selection is not good. Now, I know he can hit like 30-footers, and he can do the whole Dame and Steph thing, but it's not consistent enough to where I think he should be shooting those shots. I'm cool with him. Like, he can obviously hit wide open ones, or even if it's a step up and he's contested, but the step backs from 30+, it seems like a wasted possession, and that's not something that you should have when you can get as much points in the paint from his floaters or from lobs to Capella and Collins with him. But yeah, I don't know if he's that superstar yet. I'd say superstar is top 10. I don't know if he's a top 10 player yet, but I think he's going to be there soon. I think he's at the very border edge of it.
That's fair. That's fair. And I agree with a lot you said, especially particular the shooting. I think one of the misnomers with Trae Young, because he's a guy that hits a lot of difficult shots and he's a guy that shoots a lot of threes, is that he is this, Steph Curry type, light Dame type, lights out, 38% 3-point shooter. He really isn't. He isn't a consistent 3-point shooter. Now, I'd argue maybe sometimes he has to put up bad shots because he's played with poor spacing at times in his career. This year, I think, was the anomaly that he actually had real spacing where he didn't have to just throw up a 28-footer so that the defense has to respect that shot. And he did, to his credit, he did reduce his attempts from 3. But I'm with you. Trae Young's handle and ability and quickness and first step explosion Like, nobody can stay in front of Trae Young. Nobody. Like, Ben Simmons is an elite defensive player, and he did probably as good a job as you can do on Trae Young in a playoff series in terms of his efficiency and everything. Trae Young still controlled the series, and Trae Young was still able to, at the most important pivotal moments of the game, be able to get the exact shots he wanted and be able to get to the paint at will. So I'm with you. I just feel like with somebody like him, like, yeah, you can shoot 30-footers, but I don't think it has to be a shot that you have to take 2 or 3 times a game just because your handle and your ability to attack the paint and pass is so good. Now, in regards to what he proved, I'm with you on a lot of the things he proved, but I think it really comes down to one answer, and I think it's really simple and brief. He proved he's a winner. I think Trae Young's playmaking, I think most people understood it. That's why he was an all-star game starter last year. I think this year, a lot of people, and Lloyd Pierce had something to do with it, and I would say I fell into this trap as well. I saw his size, I saw his defense, I saw his turnovers, shot selection, and I said, you can't really win long-term with Trae Young as your main player just because there's specific limitations that I felt were size-based and defense-based. I was wrong. You can win with Trae Young as your main point guard because first of all, I think that Lloyd Pierce, we didn't realize how much that was hurting Trae Young. Clearly, if you looked at the green light, the confidence, that the entire team played with Nate McMillan and how smart he was with his rotations and usage of different players throughout. It was awesome. And the thing with Trae Young is he's an unbelievable passer. And I think that that's the one thing that I personally overlooked is that he makes everybody around him so much better by his passing. There's a stat. Trae Young was the most double player in the NBA this year. That's crazy to me. And the thing is, I'm actually shocked that you would double somebody like Trae Young because, yeah, you want to get the ball out of his hands. But Trae Young is such a good passer out of double teams, and he's such a good decision maker out of double teams. And the Hawks have enough decent players on their roster throughout where they can get their own shot and everything, like in a 4-on-3 situation where doubling Trae Young to me is scary because his passing is so good. But he was the most double player in the NBA. And yeah, overall, I think that the biggest thing he proved is that winner. And I think a lot of people didn't expect Trae Young to win like this in the playoffs and show off like this, but I was wrong. I was one of those people too, and I was wrong. You can definitely win long-term with Trae Young. You just need to add a bit more talent around him.
And I'd even go as far to say, like, they're a team that probably overachieved. I don't think they really should have beat a 76ers team. Like, that 76ers team has more talent, undeniably more talent. You look across the board. Embiid was an MVP candidate. You could argue he's better than Trae Young and regarded better as Trae Young. That's not unfair to say. Tobias Harris as your number 2, I think if he was on the Hawks, he'd be their number 2 as well. Ben Simmons, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the catch-all, and that he's just not it in the playoffs. But overall, like, the 76ers were the number 1 seed in the East. And I feel like with NBA specifically, if you're a number 1 seed, like, between the 5 seed, there's usually a pretty, like, large difference. I thought the East was a 3-team or a 3-team conference this year with the 76ers, Bucks, and Nets. I thought the Knicks as a 4 seed were a big drop-off from, I want to say, Nets were the 3rd seed. Yes.
The Nets were the 3rd.
Nets were the 3rd, yes.
No, the Bucks were the 3rd seed. Excuse me, the Bucks were the 3rd
Okay, seed. Yeah. I really thought there was a big drop-off between those two, and the Hawks were like, okay, getting out of the first round is good. That I think you could reasonably expect that with a player of Trae Young's caliber, and maybe they did have more talent. It looks like they proved it. But I did not give them much of a chance against the Sixers, and that's why I say, okay, they overachieved with Trae Young, led by Trae Young. And here's the interesting thing, too. The defenses that they played were all top 7, top 8 in the regular season. That's very, very impressive. So just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, and I think that's important because you brought up Embiid, right? I think it's fair to say Embiid was the best player in the Sixers-Hawks series. He averaged 30 and 12. He was pretty dominant. He was as dominant as Joel Embiid was in the regular season. But I think the biggest difference was Trae Young was the most valuable player in that series. Trae Young's ball handling, his playmaking, his ability to create for his teammates, his ability to make everybody around him better was really the difference in that series. And you look at the people that were guarding him in the playoffs. I mean, forget the Knicks. You go look at the Sixers series and the Bucks series before, especially before he got hurt. And you look at the guys like Drew Holiday. PJ Tucker had a little bit time on him. Giannis took him for a little bit because of the switches on the pick and roll. Chris Middleton had him a couple of times. Matisse Thybulle had him for a decent amount. Ben Simmons had him for a decent amount. Seth Curry, who's not a bad defender at all, had him for a little bit. And you look at all those people, and no matter who was in front of him, Trae Young was still able to get the Hawks good offensive possessions. And really, the Hawks offense is overly reliant, in my opinion, on Trae Young.
Yes.
I mean, Herter from time to time can get his own shot and consistently make it. Bogdanovich, same thing, but obviously with his knee, it was a little inconsistent. Maybe it'll be better if he's healthier. Sweet Lou will give you 1 or 2 games in a playoff series, and everybody would be like, see, that's Sweet Lou Williams. But they'll forget about the other 3 games in the playoff series where he just looks like he doesn't want to shoot the basketball for whatever reason, or he throws up a lazy floater or just leans left and throws up a contested mid-range jump shot. So when you look at all of that, the Hawks only function if Trae Young is constantly getting everybody else good shots and getting himself good shots. And for him to do that for 3 straight playoff series, and even I thought he played really well, honestly, if you don't look at his shots for a guy that was injured in Game 6, I thought he did a good job of he just wasn't able to get his own shot and make his own shot. But I thought he did a good job of supplying good offensive possessions for his teammates. I really thought he did. He always does a good job of that because he has an insane basketball IQ. So, I mean, yeah, he's really just spectacular. And honestly, I totally underestimated him, and I was totally wrong to have that outlook on him pre-Nate McMillan.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that they're overly reliant on him because I feel like this is a common theme that's just been kind of brewing lately. A team gets a young star. They just want to just only surround him with shooters. And, it's a good strategy, right? I think the Mavericks are in a very similar boat with how they're constructed. You could argue the same for the LeBron Cavs for some years, and even to a lesser extent this Lakers team because Anthony Davis is way better than the other number 2 options. But when they rely so much on the point guard's playmaking, and they say, we have a bunch of shooters around, you just get them shots. If that person's not on, it's going to be very, very hard to win because your whole win condition is based on this guy's going to shoot well, get buckets for himself, and then also be able to create open shots for someone next to him. And if they get slightly injured, I think Doncic had something with his neck, and then Trae Young, obviously with the ankle, somehow stepped on the refs because it's Georgia sports. It's just a cause for concern because if they get injured, you're basically just saying we are kind of handicapped right now because our whole win condition is this guy's going to be so great that he just carries us.
It's James Harden with the Rockets. It was the same exact thing. And these guys put up insane regular season numbers, and they carry less than rosters further than they should. Too. Yeah, Westbrook to a lesser extent.
Yeah, lesser extent.
Maybe you could argue Westbrook in 2017, the first year without KD MVP Westbrook, but then after that, his shooting got so inefficient that you can't put it on everybody else. But the one thing I think that's important is if you look at the great teams over time, especially the teams that had success, they had a lot of specialists that could do particular things. Sure, if you look at the Jordan Bulls, not every player on that roster is the best player in the league, but they had the best shooter in the NBA in Steve Kerr. They had the best defensive player in the NBA in Michael Jordan or Scottie Pippen, whoever you want to pick. They had a defensive specialist / rebounder in Dennis Rodman. They had a playmaker in Scottie Pippen. Ron Harper was a defensive player who could play make as well. Tony Kukoc was a great shooter off the bench. So they had a bunch of people who could do specific things, and they would rely on them to do specific things. They didn't have one guy. Jordan was asked to score, but Jordan wasn't asked to score, rebound, and play make. When he was asked to do that early in his career, he ran into teams that were just better than him, and even Jordan can't overcome that. I mean, you look at the Warriors. Draymond Green is their primary playmaker. Andre Iguodala did a lot of playmaking for them. That puts a little less pressure on Steph Curry. And, this year he had a lot more pressure on him to score because there was no Klay, no KD, and all of that. And he obviously could get his buckets. But the fact that you put less pressure on your best player, your star, and everything, because you have a guy who can play make. You have a guy who is going to handle your defense. You have a guy, who can make a few shots away from your star by himself. I think those things help so much, right? Like Luka Doncic and 4 shooters in the Western Conference every single year for the next 7 years, the Dallas Mavericks will be a top 5 or 6 seed in the Western Conference. No doubt about it. Luka Doncic will be an MVP candidate every year. But then people, when you get to the playoffs, they'll say, oh, Luka fell off or Luka's not living up to it, when the reality is that there's no respite for Luka. He's the playmaker. He has to run the entire offense. He has to create shots for everybody else while creating good shots for him. I mean, you look at Kobe, like a lot of people, like, I mean, talk about Kobe and say, Kobe took bad shots and all of that, but Kobe's role on that team was to shoot the ball. They didn't want Kobe getting 10, 12 assists. They wanted Kobe taking 25 shots a game. And, there weren't other people. It's the other way with Kobe, where there weren't really other people on that team that were going to shoot the ball. Kobe had to shoot the ball. Kobe had to take bad shots because he's more likely to make bad shots than guys on that team, on a lot of his teams, were to make half decent shots. But then they had good defensive players around them when they won. They had bigs, they had playmakers, and Derek Fisher ran their offense and stuff. So they were able to have a bunch of specialists and people that do a variety of different skill sets. So not every specific thing's on their star. Kobe was going to get 30, but everybody else was going to handle their business with everything else, and that's how they won. In LeBron, especially if you look like 2018, LeBron not only had to get 30, but he also had to get
It's over.
You're funny. He had to get 11 assists and 8 rebounds too, and that's just an impossible ask of anybody in the playoffs. And that's where I think both Doncic and Trae Young. I think Trae Young, maybe it's a little more likely to change because there are a couple people on his roster that could evolve and be that guy that you could just throw the ball to, and they can get their own shot and give Trae Young a little time off the ball. But Doncic, I don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if you don't have the secondary guy, you're getting bounced early. Usually early. I mean, even when James Harden was in his prime with the Rockets, they couldn't really get anywhere until Chris Paul came to town because, James Harden with Dwight Howard, as good of a duo as that is, in the playoffs, like, Dwight's not going to be able to play make like that, especially at that point in his career towards the end of it. In his, I guess, glory days when he was not a backup center, basically. It's really just not – like, you have to have 2 guys or
two playmakers,
incredibly well-rounded team. I would say 2 guys that can play make at an above-average level, or, I mean, you just can't advance. It's really that simple.
I mean, they expected James Harden in 2017 to dominate with Ariza, Eric Gordon, Beverly, Ryan Anderson, Lou Williams. So I don't know what to tell you.
Ryan Anderson could splash threes, though.
Right, but it's the exact same thing. Maybe Lou a couple of times.
Eric Gordon is your number 2 playmaker in the playoffs. Probably won't get you very far.
No.